Hey everyone, welcome to the Let's Talk Teaching podcast. I am your host, Kayla Durkin, and I have to say, I am seriously so excited for today's episode. A few weeks ago, I did an episode called Enhancing Tier 1 Instruction to Meet Your Students Where They're At, and that episode was a huge hit. I got so many messages and DMs and questions about getting students into small group instruction, which is what we are going to talk about today. During that episode, one of the biggest things I talked about was that our Tier 1 instruction needs to be at the forefront of our mind at all times. We cannot intervene our way out of a weak Tier 1. And in addition to that, small groups are not technically interventions. When you're getting your students into small groups, you're doing that so that you can meet your students where they are. You're doing that so you can differentiate within your classroom. However, just because you're doing a small group does not mean that you are doing an intervention. Interventions have to be research-based, evidence-based, proven interventions that show that your students are going to make X amount of growth over a certain amount of time. Now, yes, you can use interventions within your small group, but just doing a small group is not an intervention. So if you haven't done so already, I really want you to go back to that episode, Enhancing Tier 1 Instruction to Meet Your Students Where They're At. It is episode 43. It's just about 3 episodes back. Please take some time to go on back, listen to that episode, and then when you're done, you'll be completely up to speed and you will be ready for today's episode. I've actually been looking forward to this episode for quite some time, not only because of the positive feedback I received from episode 43, but also because this is something I truly am passionate about, and I truly do believe it will change the game for you in your classroom. We have so many students with so many needs that we need to be addressing every single day, and many of that can happen while you are using small groups. As many of you know, I spent 5 years in the classroom. I've taught everything from 4th grade through 10th grade, a couple junior students, a couple senior students. I've taught it all, and I've used small groups with all of those students. I know small groups work with primary students. I know small groups work with our upper elementary, and I know small groups can also work in the middle school and high school setting. I have experience using them in all of them. This is something I just feel so comfortable and confident talking about. So I'm excited to share just a little bit of what I know with all of you today. Just the other day, I was talking to a friend who just so happens to be a new teacher this year. This friend actually went through a career change. They had been doing something different before becoming a teacher. And they were saying that they gave a quiz a few days ago, and the quiz did not go well. The students had no idea what they were doing. The teacher was totally caught off guard. They'd been teaching this content for the past 2 weeks. They just aren't sure where all of the misconceptions came from, why students weren't catching on, what was going on. And so I asked this teacher, I said, so are you using small groups by chance? And the teacher was like, well, and I mean, not trying to make excuses, but just saying there's not enough time, they can't get into it, yada, yada, yada. Well, I can promise you, well, maybe not promise you, but I can be nearly certain that this is not a conversation that is rare. This is a conversation that has happened time and time again amongst many educators. Because although small groups aren't a new thing, they are still new to many teachers. We all know there are those traditional teachers who they lecture and they give the word problems. That's actually something I talked about in episode 43. That is not differentiating. That is not meeting your students where they are. And when we do that, we aren't going to know where our students are at in their thinking process, in their learning. We're not meeting them with what they need. We're not teaching them based on their learning styles and strengths. And so oftentimes a lot of students do fall through the cracks because we don't necessarily know what's happening with all of the students in our classroom, especially those really big class sizes, when we're just lecturing and then handing out the problems and the work that they need to complete for the next day. I want you to just take a quick second, and I want you to think of some of those quieter students that are in your class, the students who don't cause a ton of problems. They're usually on task. They pay attention. When it's time to clean up or line up or whatever it is, they're usually the first ones that are ready to go, doing what they need to do, doing their jobs, whatever it is. These students are oftentimes the students that we need to worry about the most because they are the ones who are going to fall through the cracks. These are the students who are borderline students. it could either go either way. They could catch on to what we're teaching about and just keep sliding by, but they could start missing things. And when we're not paying attention to what they need, what they know, what they're missing, they are going to be the ones that we miss. Behaviorally, these students are a dream. They're doing what they need to do when they need to do it. They're not causing any problems, and thus they're not getting a ton of our attention. Yes, we want to say that we are doing our absolute best to see and check in with every single student every single day. But reality is the students who aren't causing a lot of problems, aren't requiring a lot of attention, they're the ones that might possibly fall through the cracks academically because they aren't physically seeking out that attention or those interactions from us. So we just assume that they're right on target, they're catching everything that we're teaching, and they're getting everything they need. Are any of your students coming to mind? Can you picture any students right now that you're like, oh yeah, I really haven't checked in with them. I assume they're doing okay. Well, it seems like they're fine. If you're thinking of any of those students, this episode probably is an episode that you want to listen to. So with that, let's get into today's episode.
Welcome to the North Dakota Teaching Podcast. Whether you're a first-year teacher, veteran teacher, or just a mom trying to gain some new insights, you are right where you are meant to be. Kayla Durkin, founder of the Blossoming Teacher course, is passionate about helping new teachers blossom into the teacher they were born to be. Kayla wants to help inspire teachers to be their best self, whether that means sharing about personal or professional development, self-care, or the latest and most effective teaching strategies. Through this podcast, you will hear from real teachers sharing their stories about teaching, all with one main goal in mind: to be able to make an impact and help other teachers blossom. And with that, here is your host, Kayla Durkin.
All right, before we get too deep into everything today, I want to just quickly do a pulse check with all of you. I want you to think of your wow lessons and your yikes lessons recently. If you need, feel free to hit pause quickly and just take some time to think about what's going really well. What are those wow things and what are those yikes things? What are some of those things that aren't going as well? I'm assuming you probably have a little bit of both, which is why you're here listening to this episode today. So as you're thinking of those wows and your yikes, I also want you to be thinking about the conversation that we are having today. I know it's a one-way conversation, but when I listen to podcasts, I'm continuing to have the conversation in my head. So we'll pretend it's a two-way conversation. And I just want you to think about what's happening in your classroom and how you could use what I'm sharing today to benefit you and to benefit your students. So we are going to start off by talking about why. Why are small groups so important? Why are they something that you should be doing in your classroom? Well, for starters, it allows you to meet your students where they are. You know that I am a firm believer in meeting your students exactly where they need you to meet them. Small groups allows us to personalize our instruction for each of the learning styles of the students in our classrooms. We have visual learners, we have auditory learners, our hands-on learners, our reading and writing learners. We have so many different learning styles inside our classroom, especially the more students we have, the more challenging it can be to meet all of these needs when we are trying to meet them through whole group instruction. Now, you know, I believe in a gradual release model as well, and that is a great starting point that you probably, maybe if you haven't heard about, you are interested in from episode 43. So that is a great starting point, but getting into small groups helps us hone in on these learning styles even more. In addition to that, we're able to meet every student every day. Now, again, there can be some complexities. The bigger class size we have, the harder it is to meet every single student every day. And I'm not even saying we have to do small group instruction every single day. We might only do it 2 or 3 days a week. The goal would be to do it every day, but I understand that's not the reality. However, if you have the opportunity to do small group instruction every single day, that means you are getting the opportunity to see every single one of your students, hear from every single one of your students, and check in with every single one of your students every single day, which is a beautiful thing. Not only does that help you build relationships with your students, it gives you an opportunity to hear from them. It gives you a deeper connection. You'll know more about what's important to them. You'll gain a better understanding of what interests them. It gives your students validation. It helps build their confidence. You're giving them more opportunities to respond, which means you're able to provide more in-time individual feedback for each of those students. It allows students who maybe wouldn't typically participate in whole group instruction the opportunity to interact and respond with you. It encourages teamwork in those small groups, collaboration. It builds upon those speaking and listening skills because those students who probably wouldn't engage or interact as much because they're maybe a little bit shy or a little bit more reserved, it gives them an opportunity to share and speak up as well because it's a small group setting. It's not as scary to say things in front of 3, 4, 5 kids as it is in front of a class of 25 to 30. But it also helps us address those misconceptions. It gives us an opportunity to reteach to our learners who still aren't quite catching on. It gives us an opportunity to support and supplement what our students are missing. But in addition to that, I know we oftentimes just think that we use small groups so that we can reteach and catch students, but we also want to use small group instruction so that we can enrich our high flyers, so that we can challenge them, so that we can push them to their max potential. We typically think about small groups as just a place where we are supporting those learners who are struggling, but we also want to support those learners who have got it and they are ready to move on to the next best thing. Now, once again, just quickly, I know you heard me say this before and you're going to hear me say it again, but as a reminder, small group instruction isn't an intervention unless you are using a research-based and evidence-based intervention with those students. Evidence-based and research-based are the key here. What we do in small groups is technically still tier 1 instruction. We're differentiating a little bit, but we are not providing them a specific intervention. So it's important to know that we're meeting our students where they are, we're giving them what they need, but just because you're getting into those small groups does not mean that you are giving them a specific intervention. Now let's talk just a little bit about what small groups are and are not. This goes all the way back to 1990 from Wilson and Hanna. A small group is defined as a collection of 3 or more individuals who interact about some common problem or interdependent goal and can exert mutual influence over one another. So I know in this new virtual world, we have all been put into breakout rooms, or if you haven't had that opportunity, we've went to a conference where we are asked to talk as a table, or we've been in a setting or a group project where we're supposed to work together. I want you to think about the groups that you have worked with, the groups that are 3 or 4 people versus the groups that are 7, 8, 9, 10 people. Those groups where it's just you and a couple others. Think of the opportunities that you had to respond. Think of how you communicated and collaborated with that group. Now think of those bigger group settings that you've been in. This could even possibly be a staff meeting that you've been at, whatever. When you are in a group that is filled with more people, are you as likely to respond, or are you more likely to hold back and kind of just listen to what everyone else is saying and just kind of go with it? That's what happens to our students too. When our students are placed in a group of just a few students, they are more likely to respond and they're more likely to participate, which means they're more likely to retain what we are trying to teach them because they are engaged. When we have those larger groups, our whole group setting, we're just not as likely to hear from every single student. Now, here's something I do think a lot of teachers maybe don't realize or forget about, but what you are doing in small group instruction isn't necessarily any different than what you're doing in whole group instruction. You're just doing it with a smaller group. Small group instruction usually follows a whole group instruction model. It just provides students the opportunity to have a reduced student to teacher ratio. We have class sizes that are overflowing. We are having a hard time reaching all of our students. So we are breaking down our entire class of students and putting them into these smaller groups so that we can teach them and hear from them and help them learn on a smaller teacher to student ratio. Although we do want to provide direct instruction in our small groups, I do want you to know that this isn't something that you have to do right away, right off the bat as well. Sometimes it's really important to just provide a setting where you can give the students possibly a quick task or a little activity, and you can see how the students are engaging in that activity. You can observe what they're doing. You can ask some probing questions along the way to be able to hear and see how they are thinking and to push their thinking into the next level. By observing your students in a small group setting, you're able to see how each of the students is engaging with that task, which is actually going to help lead to better planning and instruction because you're able to see how your students are thinking through whatever they are working on and then provide those next steps for them. So I want to just take a quick minute here and kind of give you the bigger picture of small group instructions. So what you should be visualizing here is you have all of these students in your classroom. You have a group of students at your small group table in the back, possibly working on a task, receiving some sort of direct instruction from you, communicating, collaborating with their classmates. But then you also have these other students that are in the classroom and they are working on things too. Now, one of the biggest things that is going to make or break your experience while you're trying to get small groups up and running is your classroom management. You have to go slow so that you can go fast. It takes 66 days to form a habit. That means you are not going to jump into your small groups right away. Now, yes, if your students have done small groups previous years in different classes or grades that they've been in, it's going to be a little bit easier to get into these small groups. But if you are introducing this for the first time with your class, this is not something that's going to happen overnight. And it's really important that you have a strong classroom management system in place so that all students know what they are doing and when they are doing it. It's really important that students know that it's not okay to come interrupt you while you are working with the small group because that is their protected time to be with you. For those of you who know me, I talk about this a lot in the Blossoming Teacher course. I am a firm believer in using CHAMPS, especially with small group instruction. If you have not heard of CHAMPS yet, CHAMPS is an acronym. It stands for Conversation, Help, Activity, Movement, Participation, Success. Now you're probably wondering, what does that have to do with small group instruction? Well, your students need to know what is expected of them while they are doing the tasks that they are working on when they are not with you. So typically, if a group of students is not working with you, they might be working on some practice problems. They might be working on some center activities. They might be working on something on the computer, whatever it is. They need to know that they have expectations for the task or activity that they are doing. So for example, if their activity is to do a partner read, their conversation is probably a voice level 1. This means that they are doing a whisper type of conversation with each other. It's loud enough that they can hear each other, but it's not too loud that it's disrupting everyone else in the classroom. Whereas if you have students who are working on their computer or working on something individually, that means their conversation is going to be a voice level 0. They are not talking. They do not have anything they need to say because they are working on an individual task. But then the next question is, well, what if they have questions? What if they need help? Well, that is the next letter here in our CHAMPS acronym. We have the H, which stands for help. Now for help, I almost always have mine on ask 3 before me. Ask the partner that's next to you. Doesn't matter. Ask someone else because I do not want you to come up and interrupt my small group unless the building is burning down, unless a dog just broke into the classroom, like something crazy. Do not come interrupt my group unless it is an emergency. The next one is activity. So that is what specifically are they working on? So your students might all be working on the same activity while they're not with you, or they might all be working on different activities. This really depends where you're at in the school year. Right off the bat, you might direct all of your students to work on the same task individually while you're polling small groups. But once you get further into the school year, your students are probably each going to be working on little tasks within groups, whether it's individual or with a partner. So some activity examples could be working on flashcards if they're studying for an exam. That's like a high school example. Another activity could be listening to reading, doing a Jenga review activity, having a vocab matching practice, going through spelling word practice, working on a project or a brochure, math fact fluency, doing some sort of Scoot activity or task cards. The options are endless. just know that you don't have to try to do all of the things right away. Those are different things that you want to introduce slowly. You typically do not want to ask the class to do anything they haven't had any prior experience with while you are working with a small group, because they're going to have tons of questions and it's going to cause more chaos. So I would suggest sticking to things that you've either had an opportunity to pre-teach before they got into their groups or something that they already have experience working on. So that brings us to our next letter in the acronym, which is M. That stands for movement. Now, typically there shouldn't be any movement at all unless they are doing like a scoot activity or a task card activity. I really liked to do different stations and scavenger hunts, gallery walks type of things. So I often did have students moving around my classroom, but they knew that although they were moving, they weren't bothering anyone else. Their voice level was still 0. They were working on the task on their own. And that just comes with more practice as we get further into the school year. Definitely not something I would start with right away. I'm not sure if you've seen those scavenger hunts where you hang different task cards along the walls throughout your classroom or in the hallway, and students go from one task card to the next. That is something I loved having my students do while I was pulling small groups. But we got to a point in the school year where they could handle it. It definitely wasn't something that I expected of them right away. It was just too complex and it led to too many questions. And thus I wasn't getting the protected time that I needed with my individual small groups. Okay, 2 more letters in our acronym here. We have P and we have S. The P is for participation. How are they participating? What do they need to be doing? And then our last letter in this acronym is success. If they know their conversation, if they know how to get help, if they know the activity they're doing, if they know how they can move around the room, if they know how they should be participating, they should have success. So that is the CHAMPS acronym. There are so many different things that go along with CHAMPS. That is literally one tiny little snippet of an entire book filled with amazing resources that also help you keep your small groups on task, because there are different types of forms in there that help you see your student participation, your engagement, so many amazing resources. If you haven't checked out CHAMPS, that's a story for another day. I definitely talk more about it in the Blossoming Teacher course. Maybe I'll do a podcast on that coming up in the future, but I just want you to know, if you do not have a solid classroom management plan, your small groups are going to seem chaotic. They're going to be stressful. You won't like doing them. Your students won't like doing them. And it's going to cause you to probably just not do them altogether. Our goal is to get us to a place where we're doing small groups on a regular basis so that we can meet our students where they are. But then the next big question comes up. How do I have enough time? Okay, I'm going to tell you, you guys know I've taught a lot of different grades. I've worked in a lot of different settings. I've had anywhere from 43-minute class periods to 90-minute class periods or learning blocks. And I'm going to tell you, although challenging, you can make it work. The length of your class period and the amount of students that you have in your class can definitely add some complexities to your planning and grouping. But I promise you, with the right schedule and classroom management plan, it really is possible. So let's think about a 60-minute class period, for example. We have 60 minutes with our students. We'll say we have 25 students in our class period. There are 2 different ways that we can go about this. We can do a quick mini lesson and then get into small groups, or we can get into small groups right away. It really depends where our students are at. So, for example, one of the 6th grade classes that I've had in the past was a class that was relatively small. It was about 14 or 15 students, which sounds like a dream. But although I had lower numbers, I had the highest needs in that class that I have ever experienced. I had everywhere from a 6th grader being at a 2nd grade math level all the way up to a 6th grader being at 8th or 9th grade level. I mean, seriously, some of those 6th graders were doing amazing, and some of those 6th graders were really struggling. What I was doing in the class wasn't going to be enough. Those low kids, they needed those intense interventions, but I had to do what I could. So as I started the school year, I was really trying to do 10 to 15 minutes of whole group instruction and then get into small groups with my students. And it just wasn't working, because right when I would get into small groups, those really low kids, as much as I tried, they just were not understanding the material, and that's completely understandable. But I knew I needed to find a way to meet them where they were And so that's where I got rid of the whole group mini lesson altogether. I decided right when my students got in the room, we were going to get into small groups. And so because I had students that were at a second to third grade level, I had students that were right there at that fifth, sixth grade level. And then I had my students that were at about an eighth grade, maybe ninth grade level. I was teaching 3 separate lessons to those students every single day, every single class period. It was the only way that I could meet my students. And I'm not saying that's what you have to do. I'm just saying there are so many different ways that we can do this that don't feel like just because you've tried one way that it's the only way. So a typical way now is you do your mini lesson and then you get into your small groups. So if we talk about this 60-minute class period, we have to remember our students' attention span is typically the length of minutes that our students are in years old. That was a mouthful to try and say. So if we are teaching 8-year-olds, typically their attention span's about 8 minutes. That means your mini lesson really shouldn't be more than 10-ish or so minutes. If we're teaching 12 or 13-year-olds, maybe you can have about a 15-minute mini lesson. Either way, we can have some time to get them in the door. We really want to be sure. I mean, I guess if you're teaching elementary, they're already in your room. But again, we want to be sure that we are using the full amount of instructional time that we have. So for example, here I'm going to use the word bell to bell, but your bell could be the chimes. Your bell could be the timer that goes off. If you're in a single classroom setting, just know when I say bell to bell, I am meaning that instructional block of time. Now, if you're in a high school or middle school, I truly do mean working bell to bell. The second that bell rings, your students should be working. I constantly have teachers telling me, how am I supposed to spend 10 or 15 minutes on that mini lesson and then get into small groups when I can't even get my students on task those first 10 or 15 minutes? Okay, first of all, that is a huge problem. I really don't want to sound mean here. And I know every single classroom is so different. The needs in every classroom are so different. The demographics in every classroom are so different. But I want you to know if your students are in your classroom for 15 minutes and they haven't even got to work yet, that is a major problem. That is an example of where we would want to use some of those CHAMPS forms to start figuring out who is on task, who isn't on task, why aren't they on task, what's causing them to stay off task. We need to know why they are not doing what they need to do. We need to use all of the precious class time that we have. The second that bell rings, those students need to be working on their bell ringer. They need to be working on their warm up. They need to be doing their math talk. They need to be getting into their independent reading. They need to be opening their Chromebooks, whatever you typically do at the beginning of class. When that bell rings, that's when they need to start doing those tasks, not 5 to 10 minutes later. Yes, I want you to have an opportunity to chit chat with your students. And for me, I think I talked about this in the last podcast too, is that I had my students start working on their math talk, and then I would go around and check in with students to hear from every single one of them every single day. But the key piece here is that they were already working on what they needed to work on. We weren't wasting any instructional time. If you only have 60 minutes with your students, you need to use all 60 of those minutes. If you only have 43 minutes with your students, like some of my class periods, I only had 43 minutes. I didn't have 10 to 15 minutes to mess around. I had to use all of my time wisely. So we want to get your students in. We want to get them going right away on that task, that warm up. I know typically we need something for at least the first 3 minutes so that you have time to take attendance and take care of those little things that you need to do. But your students need to be working on something. That way, right when you are ready to transition, you are ready to go. Your students are ready to go, and you can use all of the instructional time that you have. So you're getting these students into class, you're giving them maybe a 3-minute warm up. You're then doing a 10 to 12-minute mini lesson. That's the first 15 minutes of your class. Now you have 45 minutes left of your class period. If you have a very, very large class, you might not meet with every single group every single day. You might meet your lowest students every day, and then your high flyers, they can typically be trusted to do what they need to do. And so then you might be giving them the enrichment that they are working on, but they're not spending a full small group chunk of time with you. That's not ideal. I want you to have time to meet all of your groups every single day, but when you have really big class periods, I understand that's not always feasible. So let's just pretend in a perfect world, you have 22 students in your classroom. You have 45 minutes. That means you have time for 3 or 4 small groups. I like to do 15-minute small groups. So I would say you have time for 3 small groups. So you would meet with 3 students. So let's say your lowest tier of students, you meet with them every single day during the first rotation. Your second lowest tier of students, you meet with them every single day. And then your third and fourth tier, your students who are going above and beyond, those are the students that maybe you alternate. You meet with one group Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, the next group Tuesday, Thursdays, or something like that. Not ideal, but sometimes that's what we have to do. In a perfect world, we can say that you have time to do all of your small groups and meet with all of your students every single day. And that typically happens when we have smaller class sizes or we have a longer amount of time with our students. If you get to choose how long your instructional block is, especially if you're an elementary teacher, I would really suggest anywhere from 75 minutes to 90 minutes. That gives you time for a warm-up. That gives you time for a whole group lesson. And then that gives you time to meet with all of your groups every single day. But just know, I understand that's not always the reality, and every case is so different. I wish we had, honestly, like 25 hours right now so I could walk you through every single different scenario. This is something that I get to do when I go into schools and I present. I don't know if any of you know this. This is something that I get the opportunity to go into schools and work with teachers and help them do this so that they can make small groups a reality in their classrooms. I absolutely love it. Unfortunately, we are on a 15 to 20 minute podcast and we just can't always make that happen. I wish I could. I wish I could have every single one of you in a workshop here with me. So let's talk about how you can get into small groups. If you were right here with me, you would have your data, you would have everything ready to go. We would roll up our sleeves and we would start diving in. When we're forming our small groups, we typically use our benchmark data to give us a general idea of who should be in which group. And when I say benchmark, I'm referring to NWEA, Ames Web, FastBridge Star. All schools use different benchmark assessments, but whatever assessment your school gives every student 2 to 3 times a year, that's the assessment that we're talking about here. Now, it's really important to note that these benchmark assessments do not give us a full picture of where our students are at. Those are just one test score on one particular day, which leads me to my next point. Our small groups should always, always, always be fluid and flexible. Students should never be stuck in a group. If you start implementing small groups and you notice that certain students don't fit well with the group, that they're maybe a little bit lower than you thought, or maybe a little bit higher than you thought, that is no problem whatsoever. Let's just adjust these groups accordingly and get them where they need to be. But another thing that's really important to remember is that you should be doing formative assessments daily. These formative assessments are also going to help you keep your groups fluid and flexible. Some formative assessments include using whiteboards with your students, doing quizzes, some daily work, those exit tickets, graphic organizers, journal prompts, whatever, it doesn't matter. But these are going to be the things that are going to help us continue to keep our groups where they need to be. If you're going through your mini lesson, you're having students respond on whiteboard or on their computers or whatever it is, and you're noticing that certain students are getting every single thing right, that is awesome. Don't make them be in the group that they don't belong in. Bump them up into the next group. Let's challenge them. Let's find their full potential. Let's see if we can continue to give them what they need so that they can move on. Our big goal here is we want our students to be able to master the content. We want them to be able to reach the learning target. And if our students are ready to go on to that next point and we're holding them back by keeping them in the group that maybe they no longer belong in, we are not serving them to the best of our abilities. So please make sure that you keep your groups fluid and flexible. Make sure that you are doing formative assessments daily so that you can provide your students with whatever they need in real time. So, oh my gosh, I feel like this was a lot. So many good things, but it's just a snippet of every single thing. I wish I had a couple hours with you where I could sit down and I could help you go through all of this. And honestly, I've been thinking back and forth about this for a long time, and I'm going to make it a reality for you. This is something that I know I typically serve first-year teachers, but this is also something that I just feel so confident and comfortable in, looking at the data, looking at the numbers, helping you get your students into groups, helping you figure out how you can make it work with your class size, with the amount of time that you have in your class period, with the students and the abilities that you have in your classroom. I really want to help you find a way to make this work for you. So I'm actually going to be having a workshop. It is a work at your own pace workshop beginning on December 1st. You will have access to all of the videos and modules that are going to help break down everything that we talked about today, but at a much deeper and more complex level. You are going to have the opportunity to really dig into everything that you need so that you can make small groups a reality in your, so that you can start meeting your students where they are, personalizing their instruction, meeting every student every day, building relationships, providing those opportunities for students to participate and respond when maybe they're typically a little bit more reserved. So here's what's going to happen. Starting on December 1st, everyone is going to have access to this work at your own pace small group instruction course, where you are going to go through each of the modules of why small group instruction matters, what it is and what it isn't, how to make it work for you in your class period, how to figure out what the rest of the class is doing, how to actually get those students into the groups they need to be in, how to look at your data, break down your data, and make decisions based on what the data says. So all of that's going to be available to you on December 1st. But just as I said, I want to actually be able to look at your numbers and work with you. So I'm also going to be providing 2 work session opportunities that you will be invited to join us for. So now, as you know, typically I go into schools and I do this with large groups of people, which means that I have to charge a large amount of money. And I know that none of you can pay a large amount of money. I know that it has to be affordable for you. So I really had to think about the resources that I was going to put into this, how much it costs to host the website, how much it's going to cost to host the videos, how much it's going to cost to be able to provide these live work sessions for you. And so I crunched some numbers. I'm a major math person, and I realized that I could make this affordable for you. I can do this for $47. I'm definitely going to be sharing more about this in the coming weeks, but I want you to know, because you are a podcast listener, if you use the code Let's Talk Teaching when you check out, you will have access to the entire course and both live work sessions for $32.90. You are getting 30% off for being a listener on this podcast. So just to recap, you are going to have access to the work at your own pace course beginning on Wednesday, December 1st. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to get in, to dive in, to go through the modules. And then in the following weeks, I know December is absolutely crazy, but in the following weeks, we are going to have those 2 live work sessions. I really hope this is something that is going to be of value to you, an opportunity to help you get these small groups off the ground, but also an opportunity for you to come in, join our work session, not only be able to ask me questions, but be able to ask other teachers questions who are teaching the same grade or the same subject as you. We will be utilizing small groups so that when you hop on, we can put you into the groups based on where you want to be, because this is all about meeting you where you are so that you can meet your students where they are. So this is basically your early bird pricing warning, and it is only good for people who are listening to this podcast. You are going to go to ndteaching.com/small groups. You'll be able to read a little bit more about what's going to be happening, what you'll be learning in the course. And then you'll be able to enter that coupon code, Let's Talk Teaching. That's going to take 30% off your ticket price. You will be able to access this for $32.90. I really hope you're excited. I really hope this is something that you are interested in doing with your students. The reason I am starting it on December 1st is because we have winter break coming up. Not that I expect anyone to work over Christmas break, but I know the reality is that we take the first couple of days to rest and relax, and then we're like, okay, oh my gosh, what can I start doing? I need to revamp things. I want to start doing these things for my students. And so this would be the perfect opportunity for you to start thinking about how you can roll this out in the new year. Of course, if you have any questions whatsoever, you know where to find me. Head on over to Instagram. You can find me at North Dakota Teaching. Send me a DM and let's chat about this. If you're excited and if you're ready to go, head to ndteaching.com/small groups. Read a little bit more about it. Type in the coupon code, Let's Talk Teaching, and let's get you enrolled and ready to start learning on December 1st. Okay, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I know it was a lot. You are all the best. I am so grateful for all of you. I'm so grateful for each of you who show up every week and listen to this podcast. And please know that I want to continue to do episodes that mean a lot to you. So if you have any topics that you would like to suggest, send them my way. All right. Have a fantastic weekend, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the North Dakota Teaching Podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort. Be sure to tune in to the next episode for more teaching tips to make an impact. Until next time.